Okay, so today's lecture, we are going to cover closeout and project reviews. We're going to combine those two. But just as a reminder, for those of you that may have forgotten and have gotten lazy in your time off, while you are a student here at BYU, you are still are expected to uphold the honor code. So even if you're off campus on your internships or wherever you might be, you still need to shave, you still need to dress appropriately and maintain the honor code. So just as a reminder, make sure you're getting all the blessings that you deserve and that you qualify for by making sure that you're living the honor code. Don't forget about that. I think it's really important, especially during these trying times. We need all the blessings we can get. So take advantage of that opportunity to get the Lord's blessings as you do what he has asked you to do. All right, so closeout is something that we look at towards the end of the project, but closeout is something that we should be thinking about throughout the project. And FM guys, this is where you should be really holding the hammer to the CM guys, because we get into a project and it's really hard to finish projects. You've been on a project, and commercial projects, a lot of times you've been on the project sometimes for multiple years and you are just tired of it. You're ready to get off and on to the next project that you've got, and you're looking forward to a new challenge as opposed to just the same grind every day. And so it's probably one of the most difficult phases of construction to successfully coordinate. Because most subcontractors have already moved off the project as well, and trying to get them to come back and fix work, it can often be a challenge. And so the project might have gone really well, but if you blow it at the end, that's what the owner remembers. That's what they are left with, and they think, well, yeah, they did great, but these things still aren't fixed, or my building doesn't work at the end. And so there's a lot of 90% or 95% contractors out there that just do a really great job all the way up, and then they just fail at the end. And so you can really set yourself apart by being a good contractor and all the way through and finishing strong. And so closeout takes a dedicated effort. It's something that doesn't just happen. It takes a lot of management to coordinate, and you are planning, organizing, directing, and controlling the closeout process. And so, to quote the late Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. You need to begin the project with a firm idea of how you plan to close out the project. Not just, hey, well, we'll get started and we'll figure it out when we get there. Have a plan in place to close out the project in a good way. Like I said, the owner remembers the completion phase, and whatever you leave them with, that's what they're going to remember. And so closeout includes more than just finishing the physical work. It involves completing paperwork, getting final payments, turnover of the project, warranty of the project as well. And so as the project nears completion, the remaining items usually consist of things like completion of the seemingly minor details in work. These are little things that nobody wants to come back and fix. It might be a little bit of paint touch up or putting a faceplate on an electrical device that is just hard to get somebody to come back for. Other thing, delivery of late materials or equipment that might not be essential to operations. Maybe something got delayed and they can operate the building without it, but it's a piece of equipment that still needs to be installed, still in your scope of work. Replacement of defective materials or equipment or parts. So if you find things that are breaking or chipped or scratched, you might need to replace those kind of materials. And repairing defective workmanship, and then also testing and approval of the building systems. Inspections, fire alarm inspections, HVAC inspections, elevator inspections. That's one of the hardest things to get inspected, by the way, is an elevator. You're kind of at their mercy. And so that takes some planning to get on their schedule. And if you miss their schedule, you are in real trouble. So you've got to take coordinated efforts in terms of making sure that you're getting those things taken care of. These undone things require a lot of coordination and follow-up to get fixed and to get finished. And since most of the work is complete and most of the subcontractor's payment has been received, subs aren't really motivated to come back and do work. They want to go and get production work done. They want to get as much work as they can put in place. And for them to come back and do a $30 job isn't worth their time a lot of times. And so that's one of the reasons why owners hold retainage on general contractors, and that's why general contractors hold retainage on subcontractors, is to make sure that they're able to come back and get work finished and completed. And so you can do some things to improve closeout during the job. Things like doing a good job of quality control and quality assurance during the job is an important thing that will help close out. Also, creating a good punch list before the architect and the owner get one completed. And so when we talk about punch list items, punch list is usually those little things that still need to be completed or need to be fixed or touched up. Usually we go through the project, we walk through it, and find all those items and create a list. And so that's our list. We're punching it out saying, yep, this one's done, this one's done. And so as a contractor, you need to make your own punch list. Every contractor's goal is a zero punch list. So when the architect and the owner walk in, they would love for there to be zero punch list items that they find, and they just say, this is a beautiful, perfect project, turn it over. Usually doesn't happen, but that's the goal of every contractor, is just to say, hey, there's no punch list items. We've done everything, taking care of it all. Here you go. Here's your building. And so doing a good job on your own punch list before you have the architect and the owner walk through with you is a really important thing. So follow up with the subcontractors, make them do their own punch lists as well, help them with their quality control. Hold retainage, don't release retainage until their punch lists are complete. And there's lots of ways you can do punch lists. Back before there was lots of technology, I used to have to walk around with a yellow pad of paper and walk through every single room, write down every single thing that I could think of that was wrong. And then I'd go back and type it up in Excel and try and sort it by subcontractor and then send it out to my subcontractors. Now we've got things like Procore or Bluebeam to where you can, on a set of plans, walk through, take a picture on your phone or iPad and say, this is the room, send it to your subcontractor right away. It creates an issue, a punch list item, and then the subcontractor receives that. They go in and fix it. They take a picture of it, send it back to you, and then you go check, make sure it's complete, and then you close that punch list item. It's really great that way. So that's an opportunity for you to coordinate with your subcontractors throughout the project, is by kind of having a running punch list, by making sure that they're getting things corrected as they go. That will help with that. And so other punch lists, sometimes it's a handwritten, sometimes it's signs on the room where you go and post the punch list on the room and they go and mark it off and correct it. Your architect and your owner are the ones that will walk through and do the final punch list. You'll usually get a final punch list from the architect. Now, when you do this, make sure that the architect and the owner and anyone associated with the owner that's going to have some say in what needs to be done is there at the same time from the walkthrough of the punch list, because you don't want the architect and the owner to go through and the architect sends you a punch list, and then the building facility manager walks through, and then another maintenance staff person walks through and sends you another list. You want one list from the architect. When you're getting multiple lists from different people, it becomes a real pain. You want to make sure that you're just getting one list from the architect and what those expectations are. And so make sure you're meeting those expectations for the architect as you go through. If they bring up something during an owner's meeting, weekly OAC meeting, and they walk the job with you and say, hey, that ceiling tile is broken or that paint needs to be fixed, try and address it so that the next time they walk through, they see that it's completed and you have shown that you're meeting their expectations. Sometimes what contractors will do, if they're doing a really good job of quality on their own, every now and then they'll leave acorns for the architect. Sometimes they'll leave a ceiling tile out on purpose, or they'll leave a faceplate off on purpose in a room, knowing full well that the architect's going to catch that. And if they've done a really good job of quality, that might be a good idea, because when an architect walks through, they're going to find something. Especially when they're walking through with the owner, you'll very rarely have an owner and architect look around and say, oh, perfect, everything's great. They're going to get really picky if they can't find anything, because they want to show that they're worth something and find that opportunity there to do something, to show their value. And so sometimes contractors will leave acorns, but you only do that if you've got really good quality and you're backing that up. So you want to make sure you're trying to address all punch list items when they come up, and just doing a good job of quality control so you have less punch lists to worry about. The less punch list you have, the easier closeout is. You can get off the job a lot faster, and you don't have your subs all having to come back and coordinating that effort. So once you've got your punch list, you've got to think about moving off the project. So things that you think about when you're moving off the project include transferring utilities into the owner's name, because for the project, you've been using temporary utilities that are in your name as a contractor. And so moving that over to the owner's name, getting the insurance for the owner set up for their building, getting final inspections. You might remove temp fencing, do final cleanup, coordinating those efforts, and doing owner trainings for their building is another thing you might look at. Now, when you get to your final inspections, the authority having jurisdiction, so the AHJ, authority having jurisdiction, will come in, and they will be the ones that do the final inspection on your building. They will be the ones that give you your certificate of occupancy. Often you'll hear it called a CO, certificate of occupancy. Sometimes they might give you a temporary certificate of occupancy, which is sometimes useful to help owners get moved in a little bit sooner, but it's a temporary thing. It's not a full certificate of occupancy. And the certificate of occupancy is an important step, because that authorizes you to utilize the building. That means from a life safety standpoint, the city or the authority having jurisdiction, the county, whoever it is, says you can use this building safely. You can occupy this building. And so that's an important thing, to be able to move an owner in, but that's not the end of it, because you could still not be finished with the project and get a certificate of occupancy. There could be paint left off the walls, and the authority having jurisdiction doesn't care. Or if you just have a concrete floor, but it calls for tile, the architect might not, or the authority having jurisdiction, they don't care. If it's concrete floor or a tile floor, they're not so worried about that, as long as you have all of the life safety measures in and it's safe to occupy for the public. That's what their responsibility is. And so when you get that certificate of occupancy, you want to make sure that you get a copy of that before they leave, so that you have that in your files. And so that's one of the major milestones, is getting a certificate of occupancy. Another major milestone is getting what we call the certificate of substantial completion. Now, the certificate of substantial completion, this is received from the architect. The architect signs off on this, and it usually comes after the punch list has been completed. And it's a point in the process where the architect determines that the facility is acceptable for the owner use and occupancy. So it can be it's finished, it's done. Can be used for its intended use, and there still might be a few items that need to be fixed here and there, but overall the architect is saying you are done, and the owner can start to move in and occupy and utilize the building for its intended purpose. So I'm going to pull up, I'm going to pause the recording for a second and pull up an example of a certificate of substantial completion. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. And this is an example. This is the AIA document G704. So that's something you should remember. You'll probably see it again. The G704 is saying that the work performed under this contract has been reviewed and found, to the architect's best knowledge, information, and belief, to be substantially complete. So it's saying that the work is sufficiently complete in accordance with the contract documents so that the owner can occupy or utilize the work for its intended use. Okay, so that's just saying you're pretty much done with the project. Now, one of the things that it has on here is this item right here. So a list of items to be complete or corrected is attached here too. So you might still have some work to do. Maybe there's a few items on the punch list, or maybe there is a piece of equipment that hasn't been delivered yet, or maybe there was a piece of equipment that was damaged or scratched that needs to be replaced. And so the owner can still occupy and utilize the building, but the architect is going to put this little attachment on here that says, yes, we are going to give you the certificate of substantial completion, but there's still some items on here. And they're going to assign a value to those items. So they might say, hey, there's $10,000 that we're going to hold out of your contract until this list is completely finished. And they can do that, and that's okay from the contractor standpoint, because they want to get as much money as they possibly can. And if it's that last little 10,000 or whatever that might be, then they're okay signing that, saying that, yes, we'll get that finished, but we want to get our substantial completion. We want the owner to get moved in. And so they will put a cost here, whatever that work is associated with, for any extra work or final work that needs to be completed. So the AIA G704 is really important because it does three things for you. The first thing that it does is the certificate of substantial completion stops liquidated damages. So if you have liquidated damages in your contract and the owner says this project's $1,000 a day late, as soon as you get that certificate of substantial completion, liquidated damages stop. So that's a huge milestone to get the G704. Another thing is warranty begins. So on most commercial projects, you have a 1-year standard warranty, and that's from date of substantial completion. So having that certificate is an important milestone there. And the third reason that certificate of substantial completion is important is because it releases your warrant or your retainage. So warranty, liquidated damages, and retainage are the three items that are really important for the G704 to get signed by. So as you do that, and as you're going through the testing, you're working on getting your certificate of substantial completion, there's other things that you might have to look at and review. Some of that might include testing. And so you might have systems testing and documentation. Most of those are electrical, mechanical, and plumbing systems. And you might have these systems tested by independent contractors. Sometimes you'll have what they call a commissioning agent come in. You'll hear that term a lot. Building commissioning, commissioning companies will come in, and what they will do is they will make sure that the systems in the building work the way that they were designed to work. So, for example, up here above my head, there is a vent, HVAC vent. And so they will come in, and that vent is designed to put out so many cubic feet of air per minute when it's on. And they will come in with a hood and put it over that vent. And on that hood, there's a measurement tool that tells them how many cubic feet of air per minute are moving out of there. And they will measure that against what the design specifications were. So they'll go through and they'll test that. They'll test every light switch, every outlet throughout the building. They'll test the plumbing and mechanical systems, and they'll create a report for the owner saying, these are the things that are working or need to be corrected. Other things they might need to do is what they call test and balance reports to balance the heating and air conditioning system to make sure that those things are operating correctly. And you want to make sure that you get those tests and that you have copies of those tests in your closeout to make sure that those things are working correctly. Another part of closeout is operations and maintenance manuals. And so this is something that you'll have to create for the owner. Is you will get all of the things that they need to operate and maintain their building, all of the information. And we used to have to put them in three-ring binders. Now it's usually an electronic version of an operations and maintenance manual that you can give to the owner or provide them a link to so that they have all the information with their building, because owners need to be comfortable with their building when they move in. If they're not comfortable, you get a lot of callbacks, and that ends up costing you more money. And so what we would usually do is we would get all of our key subcontractors that had big parts in our operations and maintenance of the building, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and we would create a video for the owner. We would have a training session with the owner's representatives in place. They were there at the training. We document that they were at the training, have them sign the training log, and we would usually video these trainings to show the owner how to operate their building correctly. That way, when they call you in 3 months and say, hey, what's wrong with my building, you can show them that training video, show them how to maintain things, or if they say, hey, how do we change the filters on this? Well, you've already shown them in that video. You can have their maintenance people watch that, and you've got it taken care of. And so that's a pretty valuable thing to coordinate, is that training session. And so some things that you want to include in that training session, make sure that the owner has all the people that they need to have trained there at the session, whether that's building engineers or maintenance people, and then have the documents available for them. And then you're going to show the owner everything that they need for their building. And so some of the things that you would include in an operations and maintenance manual include things like all of the subcontractors' contact information. So your contact information, all your subcontractor contact information. So if something breaks, they know who to call for warranty, and other things that they might have questions on. Other things you might have is the operations and maintenance manuals, like any written literature on how to maintain the systems in their building. You might have key schedules that show which keys fit which rooms. If you've got a large office building or a large building with lots of keys, you might have what they call a key schedule, showing which rooms are keyed to which key, and that just keeps track for them, that they can see that. You'll have your as-built drawings as well included in there, and you'll have maybe a list of attic stock that's included. So if you say, oh, well, we've got 3 boxes of ceiling tiles, we've turned that over to you, you sign saying that you've given it to them, and you have them sign saying that they've received it. That's included in your operations and maintenance manual. So if it's paint that they're wanting extra of, or ceiling tiles or carpet tiles, things of that nature, they might ask you for more attic stock of what you're giving them. Other things that you're going to give is the copies of warranties from the subcontractors might be included in your operations and maintenance manual. A job site directory of people that they need to call, and then you've got, again, their as-built drawings that are there. Other parts, spare parts that you might have. And then you go on, once you've turned over your O&M manuals, another part of closeout that you might be looking at is your final payments and release of retainage, making sure you're getting that all squared away with the owner. Cost resolution, sometimes you might still be kind of negotiating change order amounts at that time, and you're just dealing with those little things that come up, kind of wrapping everything up on the project. One of the things that you might want to consider is late in the project, sometimes owners will try and change order things into the project late. They might say, well, I'd like to add a little outbuilding here on this project. Could we do that by a change order? You want to be careful on that, because that can uphold your retainage for the entire project while you're finishing that little portion. And so most cases like that, if they want to add something bigger at the end of the project, I would always suggest having them create a separate contract for that change order, just so that you can close out the original contract and not keep pushing off the date of substantial completion or your final payments. Just get that onto a different, smaller contract to where it's separate from your main contract. That'll save you a lot of time and effort and money in the long run if you do that. And then you also want to make sure you get all of your lien releases signed from your subcontractors saying that they've been paid, and that's that protection for the owner, that nobody's going to come and say, hey, we haven't been paid on this project, we're holding it up from being able to be occupied. They're not going to like that. And so you want to get all your lien releases from your subcontractors. Another thing that we used to do to help with our closeout process, because sometimes getting all these documents and maintenance manuals and things like that from our subcontractors was pretty difficult. And so sometimes in their contracts, we would put a 5% line item for closeout on their schedule of values. And so that would encourage them to get things in quickly. So sometimes at the very beginning of the project, instead of having us wait at the end of the project to get their maintenance manuals and everything signed and warranty signed over to us, we would get it at the very beginning, because they wanted to get that 5% on their schedule of values, and they wanted to be able to bill for that. And so sometimes that helped us in the closeout process by holding a little money in their subcontracts for closeout. It just gives you a little bit of leverage to say, hey, I need this documentation, or I need your punch list complete. Here's this extra little money on top of retainage that we would hold, so where we make sure we get their operations and maintenance manuals. So closeout is really important. You're also moving off of a project, getting projects gone, and you want to make sure that you're putting a good, strong effort into this. You shouldn't just have a closeout plan the last week of the project and say, oh, what are we going to do now? this should be from the very beginning. You've got some sort of plan. That doesn't mean you're working on closeout every day, but you've got an idea of when you start to need things, when you should start collecting those operations and maintenance manuals from subs, when you're going to do the trainings for the owner, so that you're not hitting this at the very end of the project saying, oh no, we're scrambling on what we need to do. You've got a plan in place. So make sure that you're taking care of that in the process, to really deliver the owner a really good closeout experience, because that's what they're going to remember. They're going to remember how you finished, not just how you did throughout the project. How you finished is the most important thing, and that's where we find a lot of contractors fail. So I'm going to pause this recording for a minute, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about project reviews. So normally we would have had a quiz today, and it would have included things like, what is a schedule of values? So you need to know how to describe what a schedule of values is and what the purpose of a schedule of values is. Also, the common form for a pay application, which is the G702. So you should know that. Also, what PODC stands for, you should know that by now. Also, in terms of cost control, what EAC means, so estimated completion, and then how to calculate EAC as a percentage and also as a total budget number. And so EAC as a percentage is ACWP divided by BCWP times 100. And as a total dollar amount, it would be ACWP divided by BCWP times the total budget. Also, you want to know what the contract between a union and a contractor is called, and that's called a labor agreement. And then of the 6 main basic elements of project costs that need to be monitored and managed: labor, equipment, material, subcontracts, general conditions, and change order costs. Which is the greatest risk? And that would be the labor and general conditions. And then one question that I ask is, having less line items on the G703 is often helpful, so that you can help the owner by reducing the number of items that they have to review. And it also allows you as a contractor to build up a positive cash flow for the project. Is that true or false? I actually accept either answer because it's a balance, right? We talked in our billing lecture that sometimes you want to give good information to the owner. You want to give them a lot of details so that they don't ask a lot of questions. Makes the pay application easy, but at the same time, you don't want to overwhelm them. You don't want to give them every single line item that you could ever think of for a cost, because it just takes more work for them and for you. And so you've got to find a balance there. So having more or less, that's kind of a judgment call. You want to try and figure out what the owner wants and give them a good enough information. And then 2 forms that might initiate a change order on a project. You can have things like an ASI or a PR or proposal request, change order request, CCD. All of those different things would be included in a item that might initiate a change order. And then form G701 is I'm letting you think about it in your mind. It's the change order form. So those are things that I would normally ask on a quiz that you don't get to take. So some of you are happy about that based on your past quiz scores, and others just enjoy the challenge of a quiz. So in this class, we've covered all the way from where you start when you get a project all the way through closeout. So we've tried to make the class flow like a project. We've covered a lot of things in between, and in a project environment, there's continual trade-offs between time, cost, and performance. And so there's important steps for managing these trade-offs as you go through. First is recognize and understand the basis for project conflicts. Problems are going to come up. Usually it's time or cost related. And so you want to make sure that you understand that those are going to come and how you can handle those. You want to review the project objectives, analyze the project status as you go along. You should be monitoring things as you go. Don't just wait till the end. And then identify alternative courses of action. There's not always one way to do things. You should be thinking about that through the project, but then after the project as you're evaluating it as well. And then revising your plan as you go through is something that you should be doing. And so that's where you earn your money as a project manager, is solving all those different problems that come up during the project and managing the process, making sure that things are going smoothly. Now, when you get through with the project, you need to make sure that you spend adequate time analyzing the project. This is something that a lot of people fail to do just because it takes extra time and they don't see an immediate return from it, but it's something that I think is very valuable for you to do. You need to spend time with your project team and evaluate what went well. What went well, what went wrong, maybe were people in the right roles? Could they have done better in something else? Being able to analyze that and say, hey, we really messed up on this section. We've got to improve on this on the next project can be really valuable. You talk about what problems were solved, how they were solved, what problems came up that could have been avoided with proper planning, and how things could have been done better. And so you want to make sure that you're looking at those things. You might also want to look at how well you work together as a team. If the roles and responsibilities were correct, or if things need to change on a project. You also want to discuss your subcontractor relationships with your team, how well the subcontractors did, but also spend time with the subcontractors. Bring the subcontractor in and do an evaluation with them. We used to bring our subcontractors in when they were looking for their final check, their retention check. We would bring them in and then we'd have a checklist saying, do you have all your closeout done? Did you get all your payments done? Is your punch list complete? And then while we were in that meeting with them, we would make sure that we would discuss what things went well and what things could have been done better. And part of that is to get feedback from the subcontractor on what you can do better, and also giving them feedback on things that they could do better. I've talked to a lot of subcontractors and they've said, you know, in all their years of business, no general contractor has ever asked them what the general could do better. Take advantage of your subcontractors. Sometimes they can give you good feedback as well, as opposed to you just giving them feedback. So take an opportunity to do that, and evaluate people, right? Because those evaluations matter. Okay. And another thing that you're going to do in terms of evaluating, after you've evaluated your subs, one thing that goes on in companies and that you might have an opportunity to do as a project manager is to evaluate your staff, to evaluate your employees. And so a lot of times this comes in the term or in the method of employee evaluations. Okay. So employee evaluations are something that many of us have had the opportunity to go through, but how effective are they really? We're going to watch a little video here together.
I've asked that question thousands of government managers throughout the country. Not one time anybody has you are today. Your past performance appraisals. And she said, absolutely. I said, but I'm bitter, jaded. So. You know, if you ever watch the biography channel on television, see the great leaders throughout time, and the profiling and talking about people, sure, never once I have heard what the great leaders say. The objective 5-point rating scale like this. So if these things have such little impact in our lives, you spend a lot of energy on performance appraisals. We all do, right? And they impact on nobody. So why would you do it? Well, the answer to that I have to my favorite here. Jerry Seinfeld. You guys read the collective management works of Jerry Seinfeld? You might be familiar with this routine because he's talking about how is it that when you're in let's say you're in a city, okay, inner city, you're in traffic, a bunch of cars lined up in traffic. A pretty woman will walk across the street, and guys will honk, right? The idea is the woman walks by, guys will honk, as if the woman is going to stop, right? She's on her way to the store. She's going to stop and say, "Oh, now that you've honked, I'll get in." Never in the history of mankind has that ever happened, right? Where she has stopped and got in the car. But we keep honking. Honk all the time. And so Jerry asked the question, why do we do that? We know it doesn't work, but we keep honking. Why do we do that? And his punchline was, because for guys, that's the best idea we've come up with. Right? That's all we've got. The same is true with so many of the government reform initiatives that I've seen come and go.
Okay, so part of that is looking at performance reviews. When we look at performance reviews, many of you have probably had them, and some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them you're like, well, that did nothing for me. A lot of times you go in, they save up things that they want you to work on, and you look at it and say, oh, that was okay, where's my raise? As a lot of time what we're looking for. And so you're looking at that. Also, you might set goals in your performance evaluation, and usually the next time you look at those goals is next year during your performance evaluation, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember setting those goals, and you never really worked on them. And so it's sometimes lacking in terms of how effective our performance appraisals are. Here's another video here that I'll show you. This next one in line that I like.
So that was my weekend, nothing.
And this one just kind of goes to show different perspectives that you might get in terms of employee reviews.
Special? What about you? Another chip before Monday.
Today is a good day. It's my performance review.
Wait a minute. You're excited about the performance review?
My next meeting is a one-on-one. I have to deliver a performance review. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's with Matt. Oh, I can see why you're so depressed.
Man, I'm stoked about this one. Because last time Melanie gave me kind of a bad review.
Last time I gave him an extremely negative review.
What exactly did she say?
You know, mumbo jumbo manager speak.
I couldn't have been more clear.
Like needing a little touch up here and there.
His appearance was sloppy, he was passive and unmotivated.
Maybe learn some more stuff.
And the quality of his work was completely substandard.
And we talked about my future.
I also said that I didn't see much of a future for him.
Dude, you have to read between the lines, but she was majorly hinting that I could go places.
I don't think he's going to make it to the end of the year anyway.
With a little spit and polish, no big deal. So that's what I did. Got myself some spit and polish. Buddy, you're looking at Mr. Improved.
If anything, he's gotten Worse, I don't know which is more objectionable, his social deficiencies or his technical incompetencies.
I mean, I busted my hump this last year. I even took some night classes at the community college.
You can see why you're so enthused about things.
It's more than that. I think I'll finally get that promotion I deserve. And believe me, with a new baby on the way, I could use all the cash I could get.
I'm putting Matt on probation, and that means no yearly bonus, but fortunately, I hear his wife has a good job.
Especially with my wife losing her job and all.
Sorry to hear about that, mate. Tell you what, you give me a call after the review and we'll celebrate over lunch or something.
Cheerio.
Well, call me for lunch later. I have a feeling you're gonna need to take a break. Well, Matt, are you ready?
You bet. Now, I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, I know. And maybe it's just nerves because my wife lost her job and all. But you'll see I deserve that promotion.
Promotion?
Yes. And I have you to thank. You know that little pep talk last time? And with being a new daddy and all. Anyway, I'm just so excited to hear what you have to say.
Facing a crucial conversation.
Okay. So when we look at our employee evaluations, you can see that there's a difference in perception, whether it's coming from the employee or the manager. There can be a difference there. And so when we're looking at the purpose of employee evaluations and appraisals, what are they supposed to achieve? They're supposed to help you improve as an employee, try and determine things that you need to work on, skills that you may need to acquire, but that's not always what's happening in these appraisals. And so we also look at how often are they happening. Sometimes they're yearly, sometimes it is a quarterly or bi-yearly. How often should they be? It really depends. Usually feedback should be ongoing, so that a formal review annually is fine, just to kind of sum things up. But if you're not getting feedback in a regular basis, then it's probably not very effective. And so you might want to consider when you're being evaluated. And if you're not being evaluated, just talk to your manager and have that open dialogue on things that you need to be working on, and then follow up on those goals. One of the major problems with appraisals is that people are different, and we try to evaluate them as being the same. And so for this part of the lecture, go ahead and stand up. I'm going to ask you to do a few things that are you need to be standing up. You can just do it right in front of your computer, but for you to get the effect, stand up and do the things that I ask you to do. And so when I ask you to do it, just naturally do it and don't think about it first. Okay, look at your fingernails. Okay, and hold it the way you're holding them. So women tend to spread out their fingers like this and look at them, at their fingernails like this. Men tend to do this, to look at that. Which one are you? Now look at the bottom of your shoe. Okay, hold it the way you are. I'll stand up for this as well. So women put their feet back and look over their shoulder this way. Men cross their feet and look down this way. Which one are you? The next one is put your hands on the first place you would reach to take off a sweater. Women start at the waist, and men reach for the shoulders and pull. Now you can sit down. And another one is how men and women differ when they try and squeeze through a tight passage with people on one side and a wall on another. So how would you do it? Men usually face the people, so their back's to the wall and their front is facing the people. Women usually face the wall with their back to the people. They're not learned characteristics, it's just part of our system. We all have natural tendencies in all of these, whether you look at your fingernails like this or like this. We're all not the same. And we're all not the normal, even though one gender might do it one way more often than another. That doesn't mean that you're wrong for doing it the way that you're doing it. Another way is to fold your arms or do your hands and put one thumb on top of the other. Mine is left over right. Yours might be right over left. Who's right? Well, if I'm the reviewer, I do it the way that I do it, and so I must be right. So that's one of the disadvantages with performance appraisals is individual bias, to where if something seems out of the sorts to you, it might not reflect well for that person in terms of their performance review. So our evaluations often result in 3 different things. Like if they were a patient in a hospital, the patient either dies, thrives, or survives. That's kind of how performance evaluations are. And so unfortunately, which one it'll be is often a result of the evaluation or the evaluator. I remember my project manager, Tom, he was 70 years old. And when he would do my performance evaluations, we were on a 1 to 5 scale. And he would have me fill it out, and then he would fill it out. And then we would go to lunch and we would compare the 2 documents. And Tom would never give a 5 at all. That was just his policy. He would never give a 5 because you could always do better. And that wasn't great for me because raises were based on how well you scored on your performance evaluations. And so for me, I thought that was unfair, except for the fact that Tom would go in and talk to the HR people and tell them what his system was. And so I ended up usually getting an okay raise, but that could easily have caused problems for me just because my evaluator was different and thought differently than most other evaluators. And so that's something that you kind of take into account is how the evaluation takes place and who the evaluator is. So you've got to kind of look at that. People are different. We're always trying to evaluate them as being the same. Another thing that you might recognize or might look at is who's doing the evaluating, because sometimes you might have somebody evaluating you that has no idea what you do. I'll use myself as an example. The person that does my yearly performance evaluation is in the IT department. That's just the school structure that we have currently. The head of the School of Technology is in the IT faculty. And so he does my annual review. Is that a good representation of what I want? Not really. He has no idea what I do. I write down all the things that I do, but he doesn't see me on a day-to-day basis. He doesn't understand what I do with students, how I relate with the other faculty very well. And so that's something that in terms of the system is not really good. I would much rather be evaluated by my peers in the construction management department. And so sometimes companies will have what they call a 360 evaluation, which means you're evaluated by multiple positions around you. So if you're a project engineer, you're not just being evaluated by your project manager. You might also be evaluated by your superintendent that you work with and any other project engineers or field engineers that are working with you. And so you get a full circle evaluation from people in different positions around you. And that sometimes is a valuable activity in terms of getting appraisals and going through that process. I'm going to kind of show a little diagram here, or draw a diagram as I go through here. And so a lot of times employee appraisals kind of look like this. We'll kind of draw Venn diagram here. Okay, so this circle here is employee expectations. Okay, and then up here is management expectations. And over here is the actual performance. So in this case, the only thing that's really being measured is this little section in here. That can often happen in organizations. You want to make sure that you're trying to bring these circles as close together as possible so that the more close they are aligned, the more accurate the appraisal is that's being evaluated. So you want to make sure that you're looking at that, and employees' abilities aren't always truly being measured. And so some of the weaknesses of traditional review systems include that appraisals are more based on personality rather than what people can actually do. Most managers aren't really qualified to assess personality of individuals. Appraisal tools lack validity. So if one person evaluated an employee and another person evaluated an employee, those two evaluations could be totally different based on who did the evaluation. We always display bias, right? If we like a person or they like to do the same activities that we do, we're friends with them, we're probably going to give them a higher score than somebody that we might not have the same things in common with. A lot of times people don't understand what they're being evaluated on. In this example up here, our expectations, management's clearly got different expectations than what the employee expectations are. And if those aren't clearly stated, then you're going to have a gap in where the appraisal should be. And sometimes appraisals are arbitrary or just unjust when they're used for discipline or salary increases or promotion. So you want to be careful with some of these evaluation methods. But one of the things that you want to do is make sure you are evaluating people. You want to give people those opportunities to learn and to grow, and make sure everybody's being evaluated, from the people down, your craftsmen, all the way up to your executives. Make sure everybody has that chance to be evaluated, and help your employees to get to the next level. Help them succeed. If they succeed, you succeed. And you know, one thing that I've read, it says, don't withhold your praise for employees. Usually employees receive 6% positive statements versus 94% negative statements in terms of how they're doing or how to improve. And so make sure you're helping your employees to feel good about themselves, but also challenging them to work hard. And then make sure that you're getting those opportunities to your employees to move up. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is make sure you're training your replacement. Some managers are afraid to train their replacement, but that's something that you shouldn't be afraid to do. You should be always trying to do so that you can move up to the next position as well. And so you need to get those opportunities and make sure that your employees are engaged, and set those expectations for your employees. So when reviewing projects, make sure you're reviewing people, you're reviewing subcontractors, you're reviewing your team performance so that you can get the most out of your next project. If you fail to do project reviews after you finish the closeout process, you're missing out on a great opportunity to springboard your next projects into much better performance. So we will go ahead and end there for today.